Welcome back to the New Levels Coaching Podcast. Remember, we are the endurance podcast that brings the endurance world lots of inspiration and education so you can literally go away and run with it. We have had a bit of a holiday, but it is welcome back time. So apologies for the delay in getting this podcast out, but we did want to have a bit of a holiday. So we are 1 week behind schedule, but I'm delighted to be joined by my better half, Gemma Hillier-Moses, who's back on the pod.
Thank you for having me. I was just about to say holiday. Really? was it actually a holiday?
Well, that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this episode. This episode is all about holidays and how to plan your training and whether that is a holiday or whether it's a training camp or whether it's working on holiday. I guess we did all three of those in some capacities whilst we were away. But it was nice to get away and to go and see the mountains. And whilst we were out there, we thought, wouldn't it be great to do an episode on training around your holidays? So in this episode, what we are going to discuss is everything that you need to consider if you're going away, what type of holiday you're having, whether that's a training camp, whether it's just a holiday with family, whether it's getting away with friends, and how you can potentially structure your training around that type of holiday or getaway. It feels like appropriate timing as well because everybody we speak to seems to be going away now. The summer holidays are coming despite the rain being still here, and a lot of people have questions around when they go away as to how best to structure their training. So we thought, why not dip into a little bit of what we've been doing over the last few weeks, but also provide a little bit of education and inspiration around training whilst you're away. So that is exactly where we're going to kick off. As always, I'm your host, Lewis Moses, founder here at New Levels Coaching, and Gemma has been training in the Alps, getting ready for her race. Well, remind me, Gemma, you remind me every week now. Are we 7 weeks towards UTMB OCC? Where are we at?
I don't know now. You told me to stop thinking about it. So are we 7 weeks? Were we 8 weeks at the beginning of July? Yeah, 8 weeks at the beginning of July. And that's 3 weeks ago. I said, oh my God, there's 10 weeks to go. Now there's 7 weeks.
The countdown is on. Well, Gemma is very much guest, but very also a bit of a co-host this week because we're going to bounce off each other and give you a perspective from the coach and a perspective from the athlete, but also maybe touch on how we've been working whilst being away as well in the mountains. And just to recap, we had a week in Chamonix, or just over a week in Chamonix, about 10 days in the end in the beautiful French Alps over there in the Chamonix Valley. We're very much a focus on getting ready for the OCC, the UTMB OCC with James and Gemma. And then we went to Morzine for our runners retreat, which was fantastic, which we'll touch on in a bit more detail. And in between that, I did some crewing for Tom Evans at Lavaredo in Italy. So I've had quite the trek.
Yeah.
But for the first time, we did drive out to the Alps. We didn't fly. How did you find that, Gemma?
It was long. On the way out, it felt really exciting because we were going somewhere new and we've never done like a trail running camp or training camp before. On the way back, it was long. I had a migraine on the way back. Lewis did most of the driving. So you properly grinded it out. And then I'm still feel like I'm recovering. But for those of you who know me, I'm back at Bon Bon with my chai tea latte or chai latte. I'm feeling like a hug in a mug and feeling a lot better today. So, yeah.
Oh, I like that, Sid. I've not heard that
hug
one
in
before.
a mug. Oh, I say it all the time.
All right.
That's what a chai latte is, literally a hug in a mug.
It shows I don't follow you properly on social media.
No, you don't, because it literally happens every Tuesday.
Apologies for that. Well, is that your positive? Because now I always kick off our, similar with our team meetings, I kick off our podcasts with a coaching or a personal positive. So is that yours, a hug in a mug?
That I'm back reunited with my hug in a mug. Yeah, it's going to be my positive. I mean, lots of other things outweigh it, but we'll go with that.
Okay, well, my positive this week is our runners retreat from Morzine, which I said we'll touch on a bit more detail as we go. But just a big thank you to everyone who came on the retreat. It was fantastic. It always helps when you're surrounded by the right people. And I feel like we had just such a nice group of people out there. We do every year, but this year felt extra special. It's always a hard week. I'm not going to lie, coaching wise, it's full on. We get up at 7 o'clock every morning. You don't feel like you switch off till you go to bed at like 9, then you just crash. And well, sometimes later than that. And you get up and you do repeat, but it massively helps when you have such a positive group of people who appreciate what you do. So a massive thank you to everyone who came again in Morzine. We are back in 2025 and we have some new exciting things launching in 2025 as well, which we'll talk about in a lot more detail in future podcasts. But to kick it, do you want to add something there, Gemma? Are you going to add something?
No.
No?
Crack on.
So to kind of give you an insight into what we want to talk about this week is all about structuring your training when you go away, whether that is a holiday, whether it's going away with friends, family, whether it's work time when you're away. And I guess it's away from your normal environment. So when you take yourself off to places and it's not your usual environment where you have your normal routine, how can you potentially structure your training? I'm going to start us off with something James Tilley alludes to a lot. And he does this on the Run Through Trails podcast. If you've not checked that out, Gemma's on the most recent one.
I was going to say, I've done 2 podcast episodes this week. And the last one, I was sat looking out over Lac Montreal outside on a picnic bench with an incredible view. And this week, I've got a camera in the studio of light. So very, very different.
Very different, but it shows you can take your work with you wherever you go in the world. But yeah, the Run Through Trails podcast, you've been on there and James has been kicking that off. I'm usually co-host on that. So if you've not heard that podcast, then be sure to check it out. But James, I really like what he says about any meeting, any podcast, anything we do, it should have purpose. Like, what's the purpose behind it? And I think that's a good place to start here with when people are going away. So what is the purpose of you going away? And I think if you establish that really early, it can help set you up to either relax in the environment you're going to or to be proactive in the environment you're going to. But ultimately what it will help with is getting the most out of where you're going and what you want from that so that you are taking the appropriate action in line with the purpose of that. So I'm going to put you on the spot, Gemma. What was the purpose of us, or you in particular, being in Chamonix?
To train and run up some mountains and run down some mountains and get quicker at running down them and to trash the legs and then to sleep in a tent for 8 days.
Well, let's break that down in a bit more detail. So I'm going to put my coach's hat on here. So the purpose was to train specifically for the race that's coming up at UTMB OCC end of August.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what were kind of the big targets that we put in place for that specific trip? So for you, being a little bit more detailed, what did you want to get from it?
Good question. This shows if I actually listen to Lewis when he explains why I'm doing things. The first one was to get understand the course, so run the course and become familiar with it. Then
big green tick.
That tick, good. The second one, I don't think this is in order, but the second one was to get the kind of course-specific training, so elevation that's similar to what we're going to race, and practicing some of the climbs and the descents. So getting that, so where you're running up the mountain for kind of an hour or so, which we can't really get in the UK unless we go on a treadmill.
Specificity, tick.
Yeah, specificity. And then I guess the third one for me is descending practice, so practicing on technical kind of alpine, rocky terrain and getting just progressively better at that and practicing those skills.
Brilliant. Yeah. Tick. 3 ticks. Nice. You do listen. So they were the aims. And now I'm going to go into kind of the purpose of taking us out to that environment. So specificity was there. We were in the environment where that's going to happen. That's great for the terrain, even though it was a little bit wet. So I would expect it to be drier come August, but you never know.
I wouldn't. I've not done a trail race this year that's dry, so
that's good practice.
Yeah.
We have practice in all conditions. The altitude as well, we had to factor that in. So Chamonix is around about 1,000, just over 1,000 actually. But a lot of the course is a lot higher than that. So you've got to adjust to that altitude whilst you're there. And you climb very high, and we know that when you get up that high, the terrain is a lot different too. So that helped to understand that. But I guess, switching off from work was a big thing for us as well in that first week. It's very hard for us to switch off for work when it's with your own business. Any business owners who are listening to this will understand that. We have put process in place now to help us to do that. And I feel like we did switch off from work well. We had little bits to do, of course, you always do.
Yeah.
But I felt like we took ourselves to an environment where we were saying, right, we're going to leave work behind, or certainly it's not going to be a big priority for this week, this 10 days, but the training is. And that's the first message I want to get across. If people are going on to something like a training camp, yes, it's beneficial to be in specific environments, like a warm weather training camp, for example. But actually one of the biggest benefits is going out there and just relaxing and spending a lot more time on recovery and certain things.
Yeah.
So around the training, around the big climbing, the descending, the hard training that we were doing, what sort of things were you doing that's different to what you do at home, which was helping you to not just recover better, but maybe absorb that training a little bit better?
Yeah, I think around the training, like you say, relaxation was key. You're similar. We really like doing stuff, and the training tires you out enough to kind of zap you a little bit. But on one day I remember saying, I think this was before we did a session, and it's before the long run. And I remember saying, oh, let's go down to that lake that's a 20-minute drive away. And it was boiling hot. And I was like, I want to go swim in a lake. And then I was like, actually, that's probably not the most productive thing to do, because probably just need to chill out and do kind of not much, just read and just like not travel anywhere, just sit in that environment to help us recover. Because the purpose of going on that training trip where you're doing slightly more training and you want to, that recovery, you're going to get the adaptations when you absorb that training. So trying to fit a holiday in around it wasn't what we wanted to do. And I also reframed it in terms of like, if we were on holiday, we would run a little bit and probably hike, mountain bike, that type of thing in that environment. And I was like, well, I'm spending like one day, I was spending 5.5 hours on the trails. I wouldn't want to be doing anything different, even if I was on holiday. So for me, I guess it's slightly different because people separate their running with their holidays. I guess for me, I felt like that was as good as any holiday I've been on, because of the environment I'm in and what I get to do and what I get to see while I'm out running. So I actually didn't feel the need to then go and do other things. But when I did, it was kind of like back off and stop there. The other thing I did was I did book myself. So you went off to Italy to Crew for Tom. I booked myself into a spa at the end of the week.
Yeah, I know, yeah. Well, I had this long drive across to the mountains. You're lapping it up in the spa in the middle of the Chamonix Valley.
But again, that was quite tactical. If anybody goes in the spa in Chamonix, it's unbelievable. And it's actually quite cheap compared to English spas as well. So I booked myself in on the Friday after the big training had been done. And I knew I had a run in the morning. No, I actually had a session in the morning because you swap the days. I was like, oh God, you swap the days. How am I going to get my spa? So I went later in the afternoon, still managed to get my session and my shakeout run done, but had a lovely relaxing day in the spa, booked myself a 55-minute massage. But it was like towards the end of the trip where I was tired, we were camping. It's exactly what I needed to then be kind of refreshed and ready to go. So although that was like what I call a kind of holiday rather than training activity, it kind of all falls into one. And I felt like that really helped my mind and my body just to relax, have something to look forward to while I was on my own. And just kind of reset before the week in Morzine.
So 3 points I want to pick up on there. So 3 points from that.
After an hour of talking.
No, it's really good. It's really good. So one, spa, and I'll list them so I do come back to them. So 1, the spa. 2, coming back to the purpose of being there. And 3, now I've forgotten the third point, but I will come on to it. So firstly, I want to address the spa. She means the spa as in not the spa, the local shop that you go to.
No.
The spa as in going for a nice, relaxing time whilst you're there. Part of you being there was to recover well and relax well. So people who are on a normal holiday also might want to go to the spa, and they could fit that in, and that would be a nice activity to do. You're doing it here because in your mind you're thinking, I need to relax, I need to recover. So really good point. My third point, by the way, is switching off. So I'll come on to that in a second.
I thought it'd be nicer to sit in the bubbles of a spa than a camping chair for the day. So
but then the camping chair served its purpose throughout the week. So switching off, one of my other points, I purposely, as a coach and your coach, bought a couple of books before I went out. I bought them before we got on the Channel Tunnel. And I did that on purpose to take myself away from my laptop, but also to make sure that I was creating a relaxing environment around you as the athlete, because if I'm not relaxing, it's likely that you won't relax.
And I think couples might have this as well, where one person, you're away on holiday or in a training camp, one person's working and you just feel like, well, I should be doing that, especially if you own a business together. And you're right, that was a good move. Because it's stressful, because I'm like, well, Liz is working, shouldn't I be working, but I want to relax. And then you can't even if you can't have a week off together, like something's going wrong, isn't it?
So that was the purpose behind me doing that. So I was thinking, right, well, I've got, and again, I've worked on this a lot over the last few years, particularly the last year. I've got goals as a coach that I want to achieve. What is going to make me or what is the best move that I can make that's going to help them? And that was thinking more holistically of saying, well, if I chill out, it's more likely that you will chill out. Now, I'm not the best reader, but I actually really enjoyed reading. I finished the book. I'm on to my second book now. And that isn't something I would have done before. I would have picked up the laptop or found something to do or been on my phone. So that helps. It also helps with recovery because it helps you to chill out. And I was also training more because I was coming out on these training runs with you. And the purpose behind that for me as a coach was I wanted to understand the course. I'm still a massive believer in that. I don't want to compete at the best level anymore. I don't want to be an elite athlete, but I want to be an elite coach. And for me to be an elite coach, I believe I need to understand the course. So I had to do a lot more running than I had been doing. Yeah. And you dragged me out on a 4.25 hour long run. So I needed to recover as well. So I recognised that. The third thing that you mentioned was purpose. You mentioned about going down to the lake and not doing that on that hot day. It was a beautiful day. Now, if we had been on holiday, we would have done that.
Yeah.
If we were on a proper holiday, we'd have said, sod it, we've done our run, let's go to the lake, let's go and chill, let's get a bit sunburnt, but let's go and enjoy ourselves. Like, it wasn't that we weren't enjoying ourselves, but it comes back to that, why am I here? I am here to train, I am here to rest and recover, I am here to absorb the training. Is going to the lake the best thing for me to do if that is the purpose of me being here? And the answer is no. Whereas if you're on a holiday, is the best thing for me to go and enjoy myself down the lake and go for a swim and embrace the environment? Yeah, of course it is. But is it going to help you recover the best? No. And we've made that mistake before on training camps, and I think we've learned from that. So that's one of the big points I wanted to make to people is, if you're on holiday and it is a holiday, don't be afraid to do that stuff because that's why you're there. But if you are going somewhere to train and you want a specific purpose, or you're certainly looking for a specific stimulus from that training camp, then have a think about what you're doing around the training. Would you say that's a fair point?
Yeah, no, really good point. So what I'd like to say to people as well is what I found really helpful. So I found kind of holiday training stuff quite stressful because we all do running as a hobby, regardless, like unless you're paid for it, regardless if like sub-elite level down to your everyday runner. And it's hard to look at your year and start thinking, well, I can dedicate that to a training camp when I've got family holidays, I've got things I want to do with other people, friends, and it can get quite stressful. The biggest thing that I found beneficial was looking at, like, I know you can't do this now, but I think we talked about it earlier podcast, was like in January or December, looking at your year and how it plays out. Because for me, planning is really important. So if I see my training plan and I'm like, how do I fit that? Say I was going with a friend, going away for a weekend, I'd be like, how that would really stress me out about how I could fit like 2-hour run in a session and still enjoy my holiday. But I think this year we've planned it so well that I've known what's coming. So like I know the purpose of each trip away, and I know that I can't really have a holiday until, well, if we do have a holiday, because we've spent most money on travel, but I wouldn't have a proper holiday until September, October time, because there's a big goal. Everything, if I went away, it just removed me from that purpose and the training. And so, but planning that in advance has meant my mind's a lot more settled. Whereas if I try and fit, like, we're often guilty of trying to fit everything in and trying to please everybody. And actually you can't do that. So planning your summer especially. So say, for example, you've got children and you want to go on that summer holiday, look at when your key races are. So you might want to shift your season slightly earlier so that your key races happen. And then you can actually have 2 weeks off. Like we did it. So when we were young, when we were going through uni, I had a lot of injuries. So I never felt like I did a summer track season. I had an end of season break. I never felt like I had that. Whereas in, I think, 2017, 18, 19, we had our summer seasons, and at the end, we went on holiday for 2 weeks and just went on holiday. I don't think I ran. I think we ran for fun, but that was about it. And that felt like the right way to do it because, like you said, each trip away had purpose, but it was planned in. And then you don't stress over the summer about having to please everyone and do everything because you've managed where your key races are, you've looked at where your holidays are, and then everything's a bit more planned out.
Yeah, and that's the situation a lot of people are going to find themselves in right now, is that they're going away and it's the middle of summer and they may not have marathons. Let's take somebody, I don't know, who's entered in Valencia Marathon, for example.
Yeah.
You've still got a long time until that marathon. So it might not be a bad idea to actually just chill out on this holiday and take it now, because it's better doing that now than, say, October half term and you go away again with the family, and that's going to fall in like the bulk of your training. So at that time, you might say to the family, well, look, I'm going to use an example here. I'm using specific examples here, which I've come across before in the coaching world. This isn't just a made-up scenario. This is people I've had conversations with. Look, why don't you do everything with the family on this holiday, but speak to the family and say, but the one in October, if you're going away in October again, I'm going to have to be a little bit more selfish in a sense of I'm going to have to get my training in. That doesn't mean I can't do the things that we want to do together, but it does mean that my training has to be a little bit more of a priority on that trip. But this time, you know what? Let's go wild. Let's do all the things we want to do. And that comes again down to careful planning and having a purpose around each of those holidays, but also understanding your goals as an athlete. If your goals are to run well in Valencia Marathon, and that's a big goal for you and your family are going to come out there and support, then you want to put the time and effort into it because it's going to be worth it, and you're going to maybe inspire people around you, whether it's family, friends, whoever it is. It might just be a personal goal and you just might be doing it for yourself, and that's, again, absolutely fine. But vice versa on that, if your goal is actually just to run the marathon and you don't have massive expectations on yourself and your goal is always just to enjoy running and go from race to race to race, then actually you might not want to ever put too much pressure on a holiday for running, because your running life might be, you know what, I just want to enjoy myself. And again, that's absolutely fine as well.
Yeah, and often it's better to go into a race undercooked than overcooked. So actually, if you have a week off, fully off running, or just like some light jogging compared to your normal training, it's not a bad thing. Like, easy running keeps you really fit. Like, how many of us have had time off injured and come back stronger than we were before? So often we worry when we're actually really fit and everything's going well to take those down days. But that might actually save you in the long run as well. So kind of don't be afraid to take 3 or 4 days off and realize that it doesn't, it takes 2 weeks for your fitness to start to decrease gradually. So don't panic about having those down days, even if you're at the peak of your fitness, because you can still achieve your goals.
Yeah, sometimes that rest and recovery does people the world of good. And I guess one thing that we've not spoken about so far is the downtime you find that you have. And there is a lot of it when you're on holiday. You've got a lot more time on your hands. You're not in your usual routine, whether that's work or whatever it is you're doing at home. And quite often then people either try to do more because they're on holiday, and that can, certainly with the training, I had to say to yourself and James, look, the volume's going to go up substantially when we're in Chamonix because we need to recce the course. We're going to be doing a lot of volume, but because that's going to go up quite high, we're actually going to drop the intensity. So I actually made you aware of that very early on. I said, look, volume's going up, intensity's going down. I want to make you both aware of that so you understand the purpose behind that. But then around the training, there's also a lot of free time, which we've spoken about. And there's a lot of time to do things that you wouldn't usually do. I said to you as well about don't start wearing things that you don't normally wear at home. Like people go on holiday and they're like, right, get the beach flip-flops on. And they find that crucifies their feet and things like that.
You walk 8 miles down the front of the promenade in flip-flops and
this
it's
is
disaster.
Yeah, or you go and hire a bike that you're not used to being on and you've done a run in the morning and then you thought, I needed to get my run in, but I'm also going to do a bike ride with a family, which is 15 miles. And again, it's not what you'd usually do at home.
Yeah.
So you've got to think about the structure of your training out there and don't just see it as, I've got more time. I can now absolutely crush myself because I've got more time.
Yeah.
You've still got to be very careful with that as well.
Yeah. But I think the most important thing is a happy athlete makes, it's important to keep a runner happy. I was trying to think of a tagline there and I couldn't think of it.
A happy runner is a good runner.
Is a good runner, yeah. A happy runner performs well. So I think it's important to have that time with have the holiday that you want to have. and make sure it's right for you. So that's where the planning does come in, because I think if you're stressed while you're on holiday with your family, you're defeating the object of being away and having that holiday. So it's important to plan and make sure, like you say, you have purpose, that it's right for you. If you want to go and do all those activities, do it if that's what makes you happy, because we've seen it before where we've stopped doing things, for example, like potentially going to a theme park with family, and we didn't think it was the right decision for recovery, but actually that can make you like more unhappy, and being around, surrounding yourself with the people that you love actually makes you happy and can help you recover better, and help with performance as well. So there is a fine line between it all.
Yeah, you're right that there is a fine line between it all, and it's not about getting it right every time. Sometimes you might get it wrong. Sometimes it might go perfectly. I don't think it always has to go perfectly either to get the results that you want. Like you mentioned, adapting the schedule whilst we were there. Like you can have the best schedule mapped out on paper. I was adamant, that's the right schedule for us. But actually, once we were there and I was seeing things and listening to your feedback and listening to how the bodies were feeling, I had to make some quick adjustments and say, you know what, I don't think that's quite right. I think we need to move that schedule around. And if you're somebody who's planning your own training on holiday and you feel like you need that extra rest day, why not take it? It's the perfect environment to do that. Or if you have a purposeful plan that's in there and you don't think that's necessarily working, then don't be afraid to change that either. Because again, just because it's set out on a plan, it doesn't mean it has to be, you don't have to stick to it at all times. You've got to have that ability to say, no, actually, I need to listen to my body here. And just because you're on holiday and you've got more time and you think, I'm going to recover, it might not be the case. It might be hotter. It might be harder to recover. You might be at altitude. It might be harder to recover. So you still have to look after your body as well, if that's what you're wanting to do. Now, again, back to the family. So if you're having a drink and you're having food and you're maybe overindulging, that's also absolutely fine if that's the purpose. But I wouldn't be doing those things if your purpose is there to train. And that was one of the big things for us. It's easy to go out and eat out, to drink loads of stuff that you don't usually drink, but you've got to remember why you're there.
From my experience as well, like this might relate to people who go away with work and have to train. Like one scenario, and it'd be good to get your input on this, that I found quite stressful was going into Morzine. So going into Morzine after a big training block in Chamonix and knowing that I still had a lot of training to go and to try and fit in around working on a retreat, which I love the work on retreat, but I knew I'd be up at 6:30 every morning doing stretch. I'd need to at least be part of the runs, do a lot of like strength and conditioning sessions and be around for all the runners. And that's when I started to like get a little bit of that stress before of how am I going to fit this in. And luckily you help with that from a work, because it's our retreats, and then you also coach me. But how would you navigate that if you had your own training plan and you were like, actually coming into this, how the hell am I going to fit it all in? And how do I adapt things if I need without getting too attached to that program?
I think this is like reality for a lot of people, whether they're at home, whether they're on holiday, whether they're working away. The most common place I see this is when people are working away. So the first thing I would say is like the environment changes, the facilities change, what you have access to changes. So people might panic and say, but I'm not going to have a gym. What am I going to do? I always go to the gym on this day. Or they'll say, but I can't run on the usual terrain I usually run on. So the first thing is flexibility. You've got to be flexible, and you've got to recognize that, again, you're never going to have the perfect year, the perfect month, the perfect week. So you've got to recognize that early. And then the thing I kept saying to you is just let me do the thinking.
Yeah.
Like, let me do it. So take the thinking away from yourself. And if you are planning your own training, then plan it ahead and be comfortable with it. So plan it out and be comfortable with it, and then leave it. Don't overthink it. Just say, right, that's what I can do, and this is what I can fit in, and that's realistic, and I know I can manage that, and I'm going to stick to that. But I'm not going to try and overdo it, and I'm not going to look at it and thinking, oh, well, in an ideal scenario, I'd be doing more. Because what you've got to factor in, and we've spoken about this before, and we had that brilliant inspirational talk with Edwina Sutton last year in Morzine on the retreat, where she talked about those stress buckets filling up. And if you just let all those stress buckets fill up, you've mentioned this in a podcast before, you're just going to end up burnt out. So what I said to you was, let me plan it. Let me think about it. But also I made sure on certain days where you're like, oh, I'm a little bit tired, I'd be like, well, we've got a rest day this afternoon, so why don't you go and grab yourself a nap? you're not needed around the hotel this afternoon. There's plenty of staff here. So why don't you go and grab yourself a nap? Similarly with people, if you're working away, it might be that you have time to go and grab a nap. It might be you have time to go and train. It might be that you're so tired, you actually just need to rest. And again, that is fine. But what I would say is don't try and cram everything in.
Yeah.
That's the biggest mistake people make, is they try and stick too much to a routine that they've had at home. They're doing more than they usually would on a working, say, weekend away, or conference is a popular one that we get, where people go to conferences, and they're also being a lot more social than they usually would. So it's later nights and you're just generally more tired. Just accept that that's the situation you're in. Again, I guess it comes back to purpose. So the purpose of a conference, are you there as a training camp, or are you there to be on a conference?
Yeah.
You're there to be in a conference. So on that week, your training needs to take a bit of a back step, and that's fine. But either agree that with yourself and get comfortable with it, or agree it with your coach and get comfortable with it.
And I think the reality is that if you try and do both, one's going to kind of crash and burn, and it's usually the running side of things. It's usually your health and your well-being and the running performance. So you actually, because for me, I'm like, well, my running is probably on par with my work because of what I want to achieve, but I still know I can't do both because of that stress bucket. And actually, I've come off the camp, I've come off feeling good running after a working week in Morsey, whereas usually I'm very, very exhausted, where I've come off feeling quite good. So yeah, I think, like you say, those key points are really important, but also perhaps having somebody to say it's okay, because if you're like me, who's very routine, very organised, very attached to a plan, sometimes it's hard to let go. And I think having you there enabled me to let go. And like you said, when you talked about taking a nap, like I felt guilty initially, and it was the best thing I could have done was go and take myself off. It was the right decision. But the fact that somebody else had to tell me that means that I've still got a bit to learn in terms of how I look after my body when I'm in busy periods of work and training. Yeah,
I think you can look at it another way as well. So I'm looking at, so you said it's almost like equal or parallel the running to the work, of the importance of that week. Like you don't want to drop the running so much that the training's affected because you're in a big training block, but ultimately your work's super important as well that week because there's guests with us and we want to make sure that they have the best time ever. So we've got to be at the top of our game. So I'm looking at it and saying, right, go and grab yourself a nap because you're still in a big training block. But I'm also thinking you're going to be in better form for all the clients who are here if you're well rested. Like, we don't need you to be worn out. And that's something we've factored in with the staff across the board, is making sure that they have free time and there's free time on the schedule. Because if we just burn our staff out, then the people who come on to the retreat for that experience aren't going to have the best experience, because our staff are eventually going to get tired and worn out, and we need our staff to be firing on all cylinders. So we've got to schedule that in for staff as well, and that's something that people should think about when they're away, even with work. If you just deplete yourself and your purpose is to be the best you can in a working environment, are you really going to be the best that you can be in a working environment if you're absolutely worn out? Yeah. No, you're probably not. So you've got to make sure that you're getting the balance right at both ends in that respect, and not just thinking you're almost trying to be elite in too many areas if you're trying to throw everything at it. And you can't do that. You need to, at some point, to say, well, if I am going to burn the candle at both ends, I need to factor in where I'm getting the rest and recovery. And also not being afraid to eat a lot more, which we said to people on the Morzine trip. You're working a lot harder than you usually would, staff included. Don't be afraid to stock those meals up. Don't be afraid to think I'm eating a lot more than I usually would, because you're going to need that bloody energy. Yeah, that wasn't hard in Morzine. The food was amazing, and I wish I brought the chef home with me because having to make my food last night, it was a bit of a come down. Yeah, it's certainly a treat when you get out there and it's all cooked for you, and it is beautiful food. Yeah, a lot of cheese, which you don't like, but no, it is absolutely stunning. And I guess that leads me on to a point where we were trialing the Hexus app, and I've just been on a call with Sam, and that was something to trial whilst we were away. So that's a nutrition app, and it's coming on nicely, that app, and Sam's got some great results with the app. He's working with a lot of nutritionists and teams across a range of sports. But that, again, helped even though we probably didn't make best use of the app whilst we were there, we knew we had more time to look at that type of stuff. So we said, well, what is the kind of nutrition goal for whilst we're away, particularly in Chamonix? What do you want to achieve as an athlete? What fueling do we need for these big, long runs? How do we prepare for those? But also when we get to Morzine, how do we not overindulge because you had a race in Verbier on the Sunday? So you don't want to go into that feeling absolutely bloated either.
It didn't stop me from overindulging. I think I went in a little heavier and bloated and full of rich, amazing food. But you only live life once, don't you? So it is what it is.
Well, it comes back to the purpose of being there, doesn't it? And what your values are.
But the key was that you overindulge slightly, but you recover super, super well. And we can worry about the rest of it in the coming weeks. But yeah.
Well, you said a statement before, like a happy runner is a good runner.
Yeah.
And if you're happy with what you're eating, then you're good. But I would also argue that an overfueled runner is better than an underfueled runner.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I back that.
It's better to have more fuel in the tank than too little. And there was certainly a lot of fuel in the tank from that week. So I guess that leads us on to like that work environment. And then how I wanted to tie this up, or certainly get to the point of finishing off this conversation, is what a lot of people don't talk about is what happens when you get back. Because what I've found recently is that you get back to your environment, and for the first couple of days in particular, maybe lasts even longer than this, things are quite sluggish. You feel like, oh God, there's loads of washing to do. There's lots of things to do, like to get things back up to speed. You've got things to catch up on at work, and the mind can go into absolute overdrive here. So again, I'm going to get your runner's perspective on this first and speak to our running audience, and then I'm going to put my coach's hat on afterwards. But as a runner, what are you thinking when you come back to that normal environment after being on a training camp?
Yeah, good question. So the number one thing is to get back into a routine, which I think we kept quite well while we were out there, but we did have like a 14, 15-hour drive home. So for me, it was to get back into going. I took myself actually to bed quite early on the first night we got back. So it's getting back into that sleep routine. Doing a big shop, that was really important. So we could, because it's easy to go a couple of days without having the right food in the house and just to keep picking, takeaways or just picking things up as you go. So that was really important. And maybe not ideal work-wise, but because we run our own business, for me, I've learned the last few times of being away, the first 2 days are slower work, and I'm okay with that. So I'm okay with getting back into a routine and not going full blown into it, having to sit down at a certain time and finish at a certain time. I just let things go a little bit because my mind copes quite well with that. So then I'm more productive in the following days. If I go full in the day I get back, I then crash and burn 2 days later. So I've learned a little bit. Get your house in order first, and then other things will follow.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of carry on from that point. I think my biggest mistake in the past has been trying to do too much too soon when you get home. Like, you don't have to be on call for everyone, and you don't have to respond to absolutely everybody just because it's your first day back from holiday. People are willing to wait, and generally, if you've got a good relationship with people, they understand. So don't try and do everything at once. Also recognize the fact that you're not just going to be full blown back into it. Oh, energy's all there. It might be a little bit of a kind of a slog the first couple of days, getting back into routine, because the body and mind does like routine. And at those first couple of days, you're still out of routine. You're trying to reestablish routine. But similarly with yourself, I think establishing it quite quickly is important. The first day I got back, I went down to the track to see the guys. Well, actually, they were training on the grass, but I wanted to go down and see them just to establish that routine again, but also to check in with them, and see how everyone been getting on. So I think routine building is important, particularly if you've relied on that. And then the other thing, just little things like the time zone difference. I know it was only an hour, but recognizing that and thinking, right, it's 9 o'clock here in the UK, but actually we've been on 10 o'clock time in France, so maybe it is time for bed. And then let's try and get back on to our timing slowly. And that's only 1 hour difference. What happens if you've, had a big travel difference? What if you come from America, for example, and you're getting those big swings? So recognizing that and just paying a little bit more attention to that and being aware of it. And again, accepting that you might be tired for a few days. You may have had a holiday, but sometimes that can make you feel a little bit more lethargic as you get back into things.
And I think with that, it's also recognizing with your runs. So some people expect just to feel amazing on their runs because they've been on holiday. I know those first 2 runs after coming back. I did one on travel day, which felt awful, but I felt the same when we went out on the day of travel. So I was like, okay, this matches how I feel. Legs feel horrible. The day after, things started to feel better. And then today and last night, it felt miles better. So I know that just don't panic. Like, don't panic that training feels sluggish. Don't overthink. Don't overworry. You haven't lost any fitness. It's just the body adapting to the new routine and getting back into the swing of things.
Well, that leads me nicely onto my next and final point. And it's kind of one of my key takeaways. Now, I might ask you for a key takeaway for our listeners in a second. But coming back and I guess going out fall into the same category for me is that around travel days that you're talking about, for us it was a long drive, whether it's a flight, whether it's a short flight or a long flight, usually travel days take up a lot of time. By the time you factor in, I always look at door to door. Don't look at the flight time, don't look at your driving time. Look at from the minute you leave your door on the morning to the minute you get the keys to wherever you're staying, or if you're staying in a campsite, to the minute that tent's up or whatever. Then look at door-to-door travel. That's your travel time. And factor that in because it takes a lot out of people. So as a coach, one of the things that I do a lot around travel is 1, plan a rest day on either the travel day or in and around the travel day. And 2, the schedule often gets easier into the travel day and it starts easier on the other side. So there's almost like a taper into travel. People who aren't familiar with the words taper, as you taper down into marathon, things get easier, you get fresher because it is a tiring time, especially if you're going on a training camp. Because you want to maximize the time of being on that training camp, which doesn't mean smashing yourself in the first couple of days. Even more important if that's at altitude, because you need time to adjust the altitude. So over time, as a coach, I've just got very used to making sure people are well rested around travel. And that goes for going out there, but it also goes for coming back. We arrived back on Tuesday, midday Tuesday. You did an easy run Tuesday night.
Yeah.
We did an easy run on Wednesday, and you did a session this morning. Before we travel back, you had the race on Sunday. So you've gone from Sunday to Thursday without a hard session, which is unusual in your program. Usually you'd have less time between sessions, but that's because of the travel.
I was quite content with that as well. I didn't moan, did I? Did you notice? I didn't moan at all. I was more than happy with that planning.
I didn't notice, but yeah, it's good to know.
Just giving myself some kudos.
But that's one of my key messages to our listeners is, you might get to your holiday destination or you might go away and think, right, I need to get my interval session. I need to get my fartlek session in. I want to take advantage of being here. No, just let yourself just ease into it, especially because you might have been sat down for a long time. And I think without preempting you, I guess one of your key messages would always be around not being active, but certainly making sure that you're taking care of yourself on those travel days as well. Yeah,
that's really important. I always think about what hydration is a key because I can get like migraines and quite bad headaches on travel. So kind of making sure I've got the electrolytes. I take magnesium that looks after all of that. Also, I guess looking after yourself fully with the movement, not being sat down for a long period of time because that can stiffen up the back and the hips. Doing a little bit of stretching during that travel day and afterwards as well, and just giving the body a bit more TLC than it needs. And it'll come off well if you do that. If you just forget about everything and just let everything go to pot, the likelihood is that it'll affect your running and training.
Yeah, we've even started, again, we drove out this time, but usually when we fly, we've even started taking like Tupperware with food in that we know we'd like in the airport because you can't always rely on getting good food in the airport. So as long as you can get it through customs and it's not in liquid form, then great. So we've started to do that because I think it's really important to look after yourself when you're traveling and not just rely on external factors that, some airport food's great, but sometimes there's nothing available and the plane food's terrible. So actually look after yourself. Again, if you're going out to train, then you need to think about these things. Some people, including yourself, have bags and bags of massage tools and all sorts of gizmos, which security look at and go, what the heck is all this? But again, think about those sort of things to help. And I know Dave Cullen, who did a great job for us massage wise out in Morzine, brought some compression boots out, which everyone seemed to love. So thinking about things that you could potentially take with you in your travel kit as well, which will help with rest and recovery.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess to summarize things then, from my perspective, and I'll hand over to Gemma as well to offer her final words of wisdom on this subject. But if you are going away, whether it is holiday or whether it's taking some time off or whether it's actually going away on a stag do or a hen do or whatever it might be for somebody's birthday, have a think about the purpose of being there. Once you've established the purpose of being there, then have a think about how your training will look. But don't just expect it to always look the same as it does at home. You're going out of normal routine, you're changing a lot of things, you're in a different environment, the weather could be very, very different. So have a think about the purpose first of what you want to achieve and why you're there, and then plan the training around that. And that will massively, massively help you. Anything that you want to add as a final words of wisdom, Gemma?
So a happy person makes a happy runner. That's what I want to leave you with, to make sure that, if you're enjoying yourself, your performances will come, and that's super important to have that balance. As you said, preparation and planning is key, but also looking after your body around travel and making sure you're giving yourself some TLC. And to finally kind of tie things up, that it's better to undercook it than overcook it, especially when you've got a lot to balance in your life. So just 80% is better than that 100% and then crashing and burning. So that's what I want to leave you with.
Good message. Really like it. On that note, I'm not going to overcook this podcast by going on any longer. I feel like there's lots of key takeaways there that you can listen to, and hopefully has educated you and inspired you before you go away on your travels, if you are going away on your travels. But if you aren't, one thing I would say is allow yourself some downtime in your season. Don't just keep going to race after race after race. Why not take a little bit of break? It doesn't have to be a holiday away. It can just be some downtime in your normal environment, but a change of your usual routine can sometimes and often help, so don't be afraid to do that either. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back with you again very, very soon. We're back into normal routine now. Speaking of routines, the podcast will come at you every couple of weeks, and for now, keep enjoying your training and your racing, and we'll see you all again very, very soon. Thanks everyone.